As a result, a significant portion of the American public has lost trust in your company. A lack of public confidence in a product usually means there is economic harm to the company. But that just isn't the case with Google. So I think it's a legitimate question as to whether Google's market power insulates it from loss of revenue normally associated with offending half the people who use your product. I also think it's a legitimate question to ask if other attempts to regulate your industries have worked. So, Mr. Pichai, Google has restricted advertising analytics or the portability of user data related to advertising due to compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation. Specifically, in 2018, Google restricted the ability to export the double ID, a cookie-based identifier that combines individual user data and creates profiles through Google data transfer. Is that correct?
Congressman, not familiar with the specifics of that particular issue, but happy to follow up more once I understand it better.
So you're not particularly familiar with how you're complying with GDPR?
Congressman, we've long been working to comply with GDPR. We think it's an important regulation, and we are in full compliance to the extent of my knowledge. I just meant I'm not aware of that specific issue with the identifier you mentioned there, but happy to understand it better and follow up.
All right, so in order to comply with GDPR, Google must retain control over more user data and restrict the ability to combine this user data with other platforms to conduct cross-platform analysis. It seems as if that ultimately limits the ability of advertisers to make comparisons between Google-based campaigns and non-Google-based campaigns. Would you agree with that?
In all these ecosystems, we are balancing between users, advertisers, and publishers. We deeply care about the privacy and security of our users. And so when we serve these ecosystems, we have to take that into account. We have to comply with important laws and regulations in every country we operate in. And so that's the delicate balance we are constantly striking. But we are focused on our users and trying to do the best we can.
And I just want to be perfectly clear. I personally believe that just the market power consolidation is significant, but I also want to be clear that when we're moving forward to regulate this, that we aren't actually squeezing out competition in our quest to do something. Because I've said that before in this hearing, and I'll say it again. Usually in our quest to regulate big companies, we end up hurting small companies more. And I'm a strong privacy advocate, but the consequences of GDPR have been to further entrench large established actors like Google, leading to regulatory capture that exasperates competition concerns. And Google's digital ad market share has increased since the implementation of GDPR. Do you know that to be correct?
Congressman, to just give you a sense of the robust competition we see, ad prices have fallen down by 40% in the past 10 years. And in fact, in the US, advertising as a share of GDP has come down from 1.4% in 1992, less than 1% today. So we see robust competition in the marketplace. And as I said earlier, we have to comply with regulation. We have to interpret it strictly, and we have to balance the ecosystem. But our utmost care is ensuring privacy and security of our users as we serve these markets.
And I'm glad you mentioned privacy, because I would be remiss if I didn't deal with this issue, because it is so relevant. And I think generally speaking, outside of the political issues and the biases with all of this, and this is for essentially all four of our witnesses, I think one of our bigger concerns when we talk about data and value, and that data having value and privacy, which is where people really get concerned with how the digital age is moving forward. And there are news reports that law enforcement has made increasing use of what are called geofence warrants. And these geofence warrants allow authorities to compel technology companies to disclose location records for any device in a certain area at a particular time. Court filings suggest that Google received a 1,500% increase in geofence requests from 2017 to 2018, and a 500% increase from 2018 till 2019. And so the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause and specificity, and that's not what these are. These warrants are essentially for any person in an area at a particular time, and geofence warrants require neither. So unless accompanied by particularized information and identifying a subject, geo warrants are essentially general warrants. I believe that the location information should be considered as contents of the Electronic Communications Act under the Stored Communications Act. Do you agree?
happy to understand more. We deeply care about this. Is why we issue transparency reports, because we think it's an important area for Congress to have oversight. And we recently made a change by which we automatically delete location activity after a certain period of time by default for our users. So we are happy to engage with your office, Congressman, and
I'm using
more.
you because these are going on in Virginia and New York, I think, right now. But I mean, this equates for everything. I think people would be terrified to know that law enforcement could grab general warrants and get everybody's information anywhere. So it requires Congress to act, and it requires everybody that is a witness in this hearing to be willing to work too, because it is the single most important issue I think we're going to.
Time of the gentleman has expired, but I believe he has a unanimous consent request. Time of the gentleman has expired, but I believe he has a unanimous consent request.
I do. I have a unanimous consent request for a Wall Street Journal article, police request for Google users' location histories face new scrutiny.
Without objection.
And then I have two letters. The letters are from Congressman Walden, Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. The first letter is to Mr. Cook of Apple. The second letter is to Mr. Pichai.
Without objection,
Google.
both may be entered into the record. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being with us. Mr. Bezos, in July 2019, your employee, Nate Sutton, told me under oath in this committee that Amazon does not, quote, use any specific seller data when creating its own private brand product. So let me ask you, Mr. Bezos, does Amazon ever access and use third-party seller data when making business decisions? And just a yes or no will suffice, sir.
I thank you for the question. I know it's an important topic, and I also want to thank you for representing us. I can't answer that question yes or no. What I can tell you is we have a policy against using seller-specific data to aid our private label business, but I can't guarantee you that that policy has never been violated.
Mr. Bezos, you're probably aware that an April 2020 report in the Wall Street Journal revealed that your company does access data on third-party sellers, both by reviewing data on popular individual sellers and products and by creating tiny product categories that allowed your company to categorically access detailed seller information in a supposedly aggregate category. Do you deny that report?
I'm familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that you're talking about, and we continue to look into that very carefully. I'm not yet satisfied that we've gotten to the bottom of it, and we're going to keep looking at it.
Okay.
It's not as easy to do as you would think, because some of the sources in the article are anonymous, but we continue to look into it.
I'll take that as you're not denying that, you're looking into it. I will tell you, a former Amazon employee in third-party sales and recruitment told this committee, quote, there's a rule, but there's nobody enforcing or spot checking. They just say, don't help yourself to the data. It's a candy shop. Everyone can have access to anything they want. Do category managers have access to non-public data about third-party products and businesses?
Here's what I can tell you. We do have certain safeguards in place. We train people on the policy. We expect people to follow that policy the same way we would any other. It's a voluntary policy. As far as I'm aware, no other retailer limits their use of data at all.
There's no actual enforcement. There's no actual enforcement of that policy. So it's voluntary and there's no actual enforcement. So maybe that answers my...
Sorry. No, I think I may have misspoke. I'm trying to say that the fact that we have such a policy is voluntary. I think no other retailer even has such a policy.
Well,
our
that's
enforcement of that policy. We would treat that like any internal policy, and if we found that someone violated it, we would take action against them.
Well, there's numerous reports, and the committee has conducted interviews with former employees who confirm that there are employees who do have access to that data and are using it. And so my next question was going to be, if you thought you were actually enforcing these rules, do you think that that's working? And again, I would just say that there's credible reporting that's documented breaches of these rules that you have put into place. And the committee has interviewed employees that typically say that these breaches typically occur. Let's talk about aggregate data for a minute. Your rules do allow for you to access combined data on a product when there are only one or two sellers in the marketplace, correct?
Yes, aggregate data is allowed under our policies. That is correct.
Okay. And interviews with former employees have made it clear that that aggregate data essentially allows access to highly detailed data in those product categories. There's the example of Fortem, a small business that had no direct competitors except for Amazon Warehouse Deals, a resale clearance account that only sold 17 units. An Amazon employee accessed a detailed sales report on Fortem's product with information on how much the company spent on advertising per unit and the cost to ship each trunk. And then Amazon launched its own competing products in October 2019. That's a major loophole, and I go back to the General Counsel's statement to this committee very clearly that there was no access to this data, that Amazon does not use that data for its own benefit, and I'm now hearing you say, well, you're not so sure that that's going on. And the issue that we're concerned with here is very simple. You have access to data that far exceeds the sellers on your platforms with whom you compete. You can track consumer habits, interests, even what consumers clicked on but then didn't buy. You have access to the entirety of sellers' pricing and inventory information, past, present, and future, and you dictate the participation of third-party sellers on your platform. So you can set the rules of the game for your competitors, but not actually follow those same rules for yourself. Do you think that's fair to the mom-and-pop third-party businesses who are trying to sell on your platform?
I appreciate that question, and I like it a lot because I really want a chance to address that. I'm very proud of what we've done for third-party sellers on this platform. We started our third-party platform 20 years ago, and we had 0 sellers on it.
The question I'm asking, I'm so sorry, my time is expiring, and the question I wanted to ask you is that you have access to data that your competitors do not have. So you might allow third-party sellers onto your platform, but if you're continuously monitoring the data to make sure that they're never going to get big enough that they can compete with you, that is actually the concern that the committee has. And, you know, I think your company started in my district. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work that you've done, and say that the whole goal of this committee's work is to make sure that there are more Amazons, that there are more Apples, that there are more companies that get to innovate and small businesses get to thrive. And that is what we're trying to get at. That is why we need to regulate these marketplaces so that no company has a platform so dominant that it is essentially a monopoly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. I just want to remind the witnesses we appreciate the gratitude for the questions and your description of them as good questions, but we'll just assume that they're good questions and you're happy to answer them so we can make sure we're making good use of your time. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, I'd like to start with you, and I'm just going to illustrate my question with a factual incident that actually occurred to me. Several months ago, my wife called and said, hey, there's a good article on the Gateway Pundit that you should read. So out of curiosity, I was up here in Washington. Out of curiosity, I Googled Gateway Pundit. And it didn't show up on the first page, didn't show up on the second page. There was a bunch of different blogging sites about how there were disagreements with what was on the Gateway Pundit. But I actually had to type in gatewaypundit.com to get to it. Interestingly, Google didn't allow me to get to the actual website. That was a couple of months ago, before this hearing was set to be heard, before this hearing was noticed, before you knew that you would be appearing before us today, and that this is an issue that obviously conservatives and Republicans have had. Last week, after this hearing was noticed, I did the exact same thing here in the Capitol. And wouldn't you know it, I Googled Gateway Pundit, and that was the very first website that came up. Now, this isn't from a constituent in my district. This isn't from somebody telling me. This isn't a news report. I actually physically did this on my laptop here in the Capitol several months ago and then today. So clearly, something had happened between not being notified that you were going to be appearing before our committee and then last week knowing that you would be appearing before our committee, and suddenly conservative websites are now at the top of the bar when you search for them. So was there anything done at Google between a couple of months ago and last week or the week before you appearing today that has changed your approach to silencing conservative websites?
Congressman, we approach our work with a deep sense of responsibility, in a nonpartisan way. We want to serve all our users, no matter where they are. In fact, it's in our long-term business incentive to do so. And I believe on our platforms, including YouTube, there are more conservative voices than ever before, and we believe in freedom of expression. On the specific issue, I will have to look into it. I obviously wasn't aware of it. We do. It could be a number of reasons. We constantly get reports.
So if you're going to look into it for me, can I expect a response from you, say, in the next 2 weeks as to why that occurred?
Congressman, we'll do our best to follow up, and I'll engage with your office to respond.
We'll follow up on that. I've got a similar question. So I've been in elected politics for almost 10 years. And when I was in the Florida Senate and the state Senate, I never had a problem with my campaign emails being marked as spam or going to junk folders or anything along those lines. And we had 30, 40, 50,000 people on our email list. And suddenly I get elected to Congress, and I'm now up here in Washington, D.C., and my parents who have a Gmail account aren't getting my campaign emails. My supporters, just last week, one of my supporters called me and said, hey, I just want you to know this, that my Gmail account suddenly is taking your campaign emails that I've received for almost 10 years, and suddenly they're going to spam and junk folders. This appears to only be happening to conservative Republicans. I don't see anything in the news or anything in the press or other members on the other side of the aisle talking about their campaign emails getting thrown into junk folders in Gmail. So my question is why is this only happening to Republicans? And it's a fact, it's happening because I can have my supporters testify that they've received my emails for 9 years, and suddenly this last year, all of their Gmail, my campaign emails in their Gmail are going to their spam folder. So if you could give me some clarification on that, I would appreciate it.
In Gmail, we are focused on what users want, and users have indicated they want us to organize their personal emails they receive from friends and family separately. And so all we have done is we have a tabbed organization, and the primary tab has emails from friends and family, and the secondary tab has other notifications and so on. These things
it was my father who was not receiving now my campaign emails. So clearly that familial thing that you're talking about didn't apply to my emails.
Our systems probably are not able to understand that that it's your father. Obviously, we don't have that context there. We just apply it neutrally across all organizations and
well, what assurances can you give me that there's my time's short. One last question. What assurances can you give me that any bias amongst your employees isn't influencing your spam folder algorithms?
Congressman, there's nothing in the algorithm which has anything to do with political ideology, and we do get complaints across the aisle. For example, the World Socialist Review complained in January of this year that their site wasn't found in Google search results, and so we get complaints. We look into it, but we approach our work in a nonpartisan way, and it's in our long-term incentive to serve users across the country. And today, that's why we invest in our radars in 49 states across the U.S. so that we can capture all viewpoints.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say, just for the record, I'm a Democrat from Florida, and I've heard complaints about my emails going into spam as well. And I'm sure other Democratic members have had the same experiences, unfortunately. Mr. Pakai, in 2007, Google purchased DoubleClick, the leading provider of certain advertising tools. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congresswoman.
When Google proposed the merger, alarm bells were raised about the access to data Google would have, specifically the ability to connect a user's personal identity with their browsing activity. Google, however, committed to Congress and to the antitrust enforcers that the deal would not reduce user privacy. Google chief legal advisor testified before the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee that Google wouldn't be able to merge this data even if it wanted to, given contractual restrictions. But in June of 2016, Google went ahead and merged this data anyway, effectively destroying anonymity on the internet. Mr. Pakai, you became CEO of Google in 2015, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and this change was made in 2016, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you sign off on this decision to combine the sets of data with that Google had told Congress would be kept separate?
Congresswoman, any changes we made,
Mr.
we
Bukai, with all due respect, please, did you sign off on the decision or not?
I reviewed at a high level all important decisions we make. We deeply care about privacy and security of our users.
So you signed off on the decision?
User consent for.
Okay, you signed off on the decision. Practically, this decision meant that your company would not combine would now combine, for example, all of my data on Google, my search history, my location from Google Maps, information from my emails from Gmail, as well as my personal identity with the record of almost all of the websites I visited. That is absolutely staggering. According to an email from a DoubleClick executive, that was exactly the type of reduction in user privacy that Google's founders had previously worried would lead to a backlash. And I quote, "They were unwavering on the policy due to philosophical reasons, which is Larry and Sergey's fundamentally not wanting users associated with a cross-site cookie. They were also worried about a privacy storm as well as damage to Google's brand." So in 2007, Google's founders feared making this change because they knew it would upset their users. But in 2016, Google didn't seem to care. Mr. Bukai, isn't it true that what changed between 2007 and 2016 is that Google gained enormous market power? So while Google had to care about user privacy in 2007, it no longer had to in 2016. Would you agree that what changed was Google gained enormous market power?
Congresswoman, this is an important issue. If I could explain. Well, we today make it very easy for users to be in control of their data. We have simplified their settings. They can turn ads personalization on or off. We have combined most of activity settings into 3 groupings. We remind users to go do a privacy checkup. 1 billion users have done so.
Okay, Mr. Bukai, thank you so much for that. I am concerned that Google's bait and switch with DoubleClick is part of a broader pattern where Google buys up companies for the purposes of surveilling Americans, and because of Google's dominance, users have no choice but to surrender. In 2019, Google made over 80% of its total revenue through selling of ad placement. Is that correct, Mr. Bukai? About
majority
80%?
of the business.
Yeah, okay. And because Google sells behavioral ads targeted to each of us as individuals, the more user data that Google collects, the more money Google can make. More user data means more money. Is that correct?
In general, that's not true. For example, when
more
you come
user
in
data,
when you type,
not the more
most
money
of the data
Google
we need is built into
collects?
the
I'm sorry, please. So you're saying that the more user data, it does not mean the more money that Google can collect.
Congresswoman, most of the data today we collect is to help users and provide personalized experiences back. Ad data
Thank you so much, Mr. Bukai.
All.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, is Google going to tailor its features to help Joe Biden in the 2020 election?
Congressman, we approach our work, we support both campaigns today. We think political ads is an important part of free speech in democratic societies, and we engage with campaigns, according to law, and we approach our work in a nonpartisan way.
It was a yes or no question. Can you assure Americans today you won't tailor your features to help Joe Biden in the upcoming election?
We support work that campaigns do. I just want to make sure I
understand that. We all do all kinds of online, social media, all kinds of that outreach, that communication. This is a simple question. Can you today assure Americans you will not tailor your features in any way to specifically help one candidate over other? And this what I'm concerned about is you helping Joe Biden over President Trump.
we won't do any work, to politically tilt anything one way or the other. It's against our core values.
But you did it in 2016. There's an email in 2016 that was widely circulated amongst the executives at your company that got public, where Ms. Ileana Murillo, head of your multicultural marketing, talks about the silent donation Google made to the Clinton campaign, and you applauded her work. She points that out in the email. I'm just curious, if you did it in 16, I want to make, in spite of the fact you did it in 16, President Trump won, I just want to make sure you're not going to do it again in 2020.
Congressman, I recall our conversation at that time, and I appreciate your concern. We didn't find any evidence of such activity, and I took the opportunity after our conversation to reinforce to the company. We realized even an appearance could be improper, so we have clearly communicated to our employees any personal political activity, while that's their right, needs to happen on their own time and resources and should avoid any use of company.
Of course, everyone's got their First Amendment rights to campaign for who they want. What they can't do is configure your features to help one candidate over the other. So you might not have found any evidence, but here's what she wrote to the email to a number of key executives in your company. Quote, we push to get out the Latino vote with our features. Second quote, we push to get out the Latino vote with our features in key states. Seems to me those last three words are the real qualifier here. That's electioneering when you're trying to increase the Latino vote in key states. And she'd already communicated that she was supporting Clinton, that she wanted Clinton to win. So when she talks about increasing the Latino vote, which she assumed was going to help candidate Clinton, and she's doing that in key states. It's one thing if you're going to increase the Latino vote around the country. If you're just a good corporate citizen, you're urging people to vote. It's quite another when you're focusing on in key states. And you know what those key states were? Nevada and Florida, the swing states. So again, I want to make sure this isn't going to happen in 2020.
I can assure you that we complied with laws in 2016. As a company, any work we do around elections is nonpartisan. Users do come to us for understanding where polling places are, where to vote, which is the date to vote, what the voting hours are. We are committed to providing that information, and I can assure you that we will approach our work.
So Mr. Pichai, here's the question I think is on so many Americans' minds. They saw the list that we read here earlier on in our opening statements, all the things Google has done. Google is siding with the World Health Organization over anyone who disagrees with them, even though the World Health Organization obviously lied to America, obviously shills for China. Google's siding with them, YouTube is siding with them. We have the history of all the things Google has done and the history of what happened in 2016 in the election, where they obviously, according to one of your multicultural marketing executive, tried to help Clinton. And here we are 97 days before the election, and we want to make sure it's not going to happen again. Can you give us two assurances? One, you're not going to try to tailor your features, configure your platform in a way to help Joe Biden. And second, that you're not going to use your search engine to silence conservatives. Can you give us those two assurances today?
Congressman, on our search engine, conservatives have more access to information than ever before.
And we appreciate that. That wasn't the question. Can you assure us today you're not going to try to silence conservatives? And can you assure us today you're not going to try to configure your features as Ms. Murillo said you did for Clinton in 2016? Can you assure us today you're not going to do the same thing for Joe Biden in 2020?
You have my commitment. It's always been true, and we'll continue to conduct ourselves in a neutral way.
Appreciate it. Yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to redirect your attention to antitrust law rather than fringe conspiracy theories. Mr. Bezos, our investigation...
Mr. Chairman, we have the email. There is no fringe...
Excuse me.
It's not your time.
Mr. Jordan, you do not have the time. Please be respectful of your colleague. She controls the time.
Put your mask on. Put your mask on.
Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Raskin,
Mr. Jordan,
you want to talk about masks.
Mr. Jordan, Ms. Scanlon.
Why would the Deputy Secretary of Treasury unmask Michael Flynn's name, Mr. Raskin? And what I want to know is, when someone comes after my motives for asking questions, I get a chance to respond.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, our investigation uncovered documents that show that Amazon sometimes doesn't play fairly, crossing the line from robust competition to predatory pricing to destroy rivals rather than outcompete them. And let's take the example of Quidsi, which used to own diapers.com and provided online baby care products. In 2009, your team viewed diapers.com as Amazon's largest and fastest growing online competitor for diapers. One of Amazon's top executives said that diapers.com keeps the pressure on pricing on us, and strong competition from diapers.com meant that Amazon was having to work harder and harder so that customers didn't pick diapers.com over Amazon. And the customers we're talking about were hardworking families, single parents with babies, and young children. Now, because diapers.com was so successful, Amazon saw it as a threat. The documents that we've obtained show that Amazon employees began strategizing about ways to weaken this company. And in 2010, Amazon hatched a plot to go after diapers.com and take it out. In an email that I reviewed, and we've got these up on the slides, one of your top executives proposed to you a, quote, aggressive plan to win, end quote, against diapers.com, a plan that sought to undercut their business by temporarily slashing Amazon prices. We saw one of your profit and loss statements, and it appears that in 1 month alone, Amazon was willing to bleed over $200 million in diaper profit losses. Mr. Bezos, how much money was Amazon ultimately willing to lose on this campaign to undermine diapers.com?
Thank you for the question. I don't know the direct answer to your question. This is going back in time, I think maybe 10 or 11 years or so. You could give me maybe the dates on those documents. But what I can tell you is that the idea of using diapers and products like that to attract new customers who have new families is a very traditional idea.
Sure, well, let's delve into this a little further. I'm sorry, you know I only have a few minutes here, so I just want to press on. Your own documents make clear that the price war against diapers.com worked, and within a few months it was struggling, and so then Amazon bought it. After buying your leading competitor here, Amazon cut promotions like Amazon.mom and the steep discounts it used to lure customers away from diapers.com, and then increased the prices of diapers for new moms and dads. Mr. Bezos, did you personally sign off on the plan to raise prices after Amazon limited its competition?
I don't remember that at all. What I remember is that we matched competitive prices, and I believe we followed diapers.com. Again, this is 11 years ago, so you're asking a lot of my memory, but I believe we followed diapers.com. I can also tell you after we bought diapers.com, we put more than $300 million into trying to make it successful.
I'm sorry. So you said that Amazon focuses excessively on customers. So how would customers, especially single moms, new families, how would they benefit when the prices were driven up by the fact that you eliminated your main competitor?
Well, I don't agree, with great respect, I don't agree with the premise. At the same time, you should recognize in context, diapers is a very large product category sold in many, many places, not just at Amazon.
But this was the online diaper market. Now, we do have evidence that these predatory,
and
I'm sorry,
and
Mr. Bezos,
Walmart
I need to push on here.
Of course,
the evidence we've collected suggests that the predatory practices weren't unique here. In 2013, it was reported that you instructed Amazon employees to approach discussions with certain business partners, and I quote, the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle. Is the Gazelle Project still in place, and does Amazon pursue similar predatory campaigns in other parts of its business?
I cannot comment on that because I don't remember it. What I can tell you is that we are very, very focused on the customer as you started.
Okay.
And of course that does include
with the
bargaining very hard with vendors and suppliers to get the lowest prices so that we can offer those to customers.
Mr. Bezos, well, I'm almost out of time. I'm concerned too, because especially with the current pandemic, one of the biggest needs I'm seeing at the food drives and the giveaways that we're having to run in my district is that families don't have diapers, and we have to collect them to give them out. So it certainly is something that has a really hard impact on families, and I'm really concerned that pricing might have been driven up here by this tactic, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I just announced that votes have been called, but we're going to continue with the hearing, so I invite colleagues to vote at, it's a rolling vote, so vote according to your own schedule. I now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank each of the witnesses today for your testimony. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2004, when you had launched Facebook, it's fair to say, I think you'd agree with me, that you had quite a few competitors. Would you agree with that?
Congressman, yes.
MySpace, Friendster, Google's Orkut, Mixi, Cyworld, Yahoo 360, AOL's Bebo, they were all competitors?
Congressman, those were some of the competitors at the time, and it's only gotten a lot more competitive since.
Well, let's talk about that, because by 2012, Mr. Zuckerberg, none of those companies that I just identified existed. You're certainly aware of that. They were all basically gone. Facebook, in my view, I think was in a monopoly by then. I wonder whether you would agree with that. I take it you don't.
Congressman, that's correct. I don't. We face a lot of competitors in every part of what we do, from connecting with friends privately, to connecting with people in communities, to connecting with all your friends at once, to connecting with all kinds of user-generated content. I mean, I would bet that you or most people here have multiple apps for each of those on your phones.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, why don't we dig into this a bit further? So you and I clearly disagree about that. In 2012, I'm looking at a document that was produced by Facebook in response to the subcommittee's investigation. It's a presentation prepared for Sheryl Sandberg to deliver to the board of directors of a major telecommunications firm, boasting that, quote, Facebook is now 95% of all social media in the United States. The title of the slide is even, quote, the industry consolidates as it matures. So as I look at that graph, I certainly think most folks would concede that Facebook was a monopoly as early as 2012. But nonetheless, I understand that we disagree on that point. Would you agree with me that Facebook, its strategy since that time, to essentially protect what I describe as a monopoly, but obviously what you would describe as market power, that Facebook has been engaged in purchasing competition, in some cases replicating competition, and in some cases eliminating your competition? Would that be a fair statement?
Congressman, the space of people connecting with other people is a very large space, and I would agree that there were different approaches that we took to addressing different parts of that space, but it's all in service of building the best services.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I appreciate the latter point. It sounds like you are conceding that at least some of those strategies were what I identified, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. In 2014, here's an email. It's from Facebook's current chief financial officer, described the company's acquisition strategy as, quote, a land grab, and saying that we are going to spend 5 to 10% of our market cap every couple of years to shore up our position. And my sense of the facts is that is in fact what has occurred. Facebook, as you conceded earlier that Instagram was a competitor of Facebook's. You acquired Instagram in 2012. Instagram is now the 6th largest social media platform in the world. Is that right?
Congressman, I'm not sure what rank it is, but it's certainly grown beyond our wildest
I can represent to you that the statistics demonstrate that empirical data shows it's the 6th largest. In 2014, Facebook bought its competitor WhatsApp. Is that correct?
Congressman, yes, WhatsApp was also both a competitor and complementary. They competed with us in the space of mobile messaging, which is a growing and important space, and is, again, one part of the global space of how people connect more broadly.
Understood. And at that time, WhatsApp had over 400 million monthly users, a clear path towards 1 billion monthly active users. And WhatsApp is now the 2nd largest social media platform in the world, with 2 billion users worldwide, more than Facebook Messenger. And of course, your company owns WhatsApp. Facebook also tried to buy other competitive startups. In fact, as Chairman Nadler noted, you did tell one of Facebook's senior engineers in 2012 that you can, quote, likely just buy any competitive startup, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. Do you recall writing that email?
Congressman, I don't specifically, but it sounds like a joke.
Well, I don't take it as a joke. As I review the email, it was in regards to having just closed the Instagram sale. And the response from this individual, this engineer, to you was, quote, well played. Your response was, thanks. One reason people underestimate the importance of watching Google is that we can likely always just buy any competitive startups, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. And given the purchases that Facebook had made previous to this and the attempted purchases, my understanding is that Facebook made several overtures to Snapchat, for example, which rebuffed those efforts, clearly demonstrates, in my view, that that email was not made in jest. But here's why I ask these questions, Mr. Zuckerberg. It strikes me that over the course of the last several years, Facebook has used its market power to either purchase or replicate the competition. And Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram are the most now downloaded apps of the last decade. Your company, sir, owns them all. And we have a word for that. That word is monopoly. With that, I would yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, you referred to third-party sellers today as Amazon's partners and that your success depends on their success. But over the past year, we've heard a completely different story. As part of this investigation, we've interviewed many small businesses, and they use the words like bullying, fear, and panic to describe their relationship with Amazon. I'm going to share the story of a small business owner who is also a wife and a mother, so you can understand how this is actually affecting the lives of everyday people and why this truly matters.
We were a top bookseller on Amazon.com, and we worked day and night very hard towards growing our business and maintaining a 5-star feedback rating. Most importantly, this business feeds a total of 14 people, which includes 3 children and one 90-year-old granny. And as we grew, we were shrinking Amazon's market share in the textbooks category. So now in retaliation, Amazon started restricting us from selling. They started with a few titles in early 2019, and within 6 months, Amazon systematically blocked us from selling the full textbook category. We haven't sold a single book from the past 10 months or probably more. We were never given a reason. Amazon didn't even provide us with a notice as to why we were being restricted. There was no warning, there was no plan.
So, Mr. Bezos, after Amazon delisted this small business without any apparent reason or notice, she told us that they sent more than 500 separate communications to Amazon, including to you, Mr. Bezos, over the past year. And there was not a single meaningful response. Do you think this is an acceptable way to treat someone that you described as both a partner and a customer?
No, Congresswoman, and I appreciate you showing me that anecdote, and I would like to talk to her. It does not at all to me seem like the right way to treat her, and I'm surprised by that. And it's not the systematic approach that we take, I can assure you. I don't even understand what's going on in that anecdote, because we would love for third-party sellers to sell books on the website.
Sir.
So I don't understand it, but I would like to understand it better. And with your permission, I would like to get in touch with your office.
I think, though, that you're missing the point. This is not just about one business. I'm concerned that this is a pattern of behavior, and basically this pattern of behavior has to change. Mr. Bezos, my question is simply, are you willing to make sure going forward that, the numerous sellers that we've talked to, they have problems just like this? And there are more sellers who have told us that they've exhausted all of their options before finally reaching out to you directly as a last resort, but they're still waiting for your response. So what do you have to say to the small businesses who are talking to Congress because you simply won't listen to them?
Well, I say that's not acceptable. If we aren't listening to you, I'm not happy about that at all. But I would, if you allow me to disagree a little bit with a piece of this, I do not think that's systematically what's going on. And the evidence that I would suggest would be useful for you to consider in that regard is that third-party sellers in aggregate are doing extremely well on Amazon. They grew from, 20 years ago it was 0. And today it's 60% of sales. Third-party sellers are growing even faster than first-party retail.
Mr. Bezos, thank you so much. You said that sellers have many other attractive options to reach customers, but that's not at all what we found in our investigation. According to eMarketer, a source Amazon cited in submissions to this committee, Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest e-commerce competitor. One seller told us that, and I quote, Amazon continues to be the only show in town. No matter how angry sellers get, they have nowhere else to go. So are you saying that these people aren't being truthful when they say that Amazon is the only game in town?
Yeah, Congresswoman, with great respect, I do disagree with that. I believe that there are a lot of options, and some of them are not even listed on that chart. I just looked at it briefly, but I didn't see some that I know of, for example. So I think there are a lot of things, and
thank
it's
you.
dynamic.
All right, thank you for that.
They're more and
Mr.
more
Bezos,
every day.
my time is short. If Amazon didn't have monopoly power over these sellers, do you think they would choose to stay in a relationship that is characterized by bullying, fear, and panic?
With all respect, Congresswoman, I do not accept the premise of your question. That is not how we operate the business.
Okay. All right.
And in fact, we work very hard to
Thank you
provide
for that.
fantastic
Thank you for
tools
that.
for sellers, and that's why they've been successful.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bezos, I'm going to close with giving the bookseller the opportunity to finally be heard by you.
Mr. Bezos, we increased our sales on Amazon by 5 times in the past 3 years. And we have contributed that much of proportional seller fees to Amazon. We have contributed that much to your business, to 5 times. We followed all the rules that were set by you. We please, just help us in earning a livelihood. We beg you. There are 14 lives at stake. Please, please, please help us get back on track.
With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. We've now concluded our first round. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bezos, according to your testimony, the marketplace is competitive, but Amazon controls as much as 75% of all online marketplace sales. An eMarketer, a source you cited to us in submissions to this committee, reports that Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest competitor. Isn't it true that small businesses have no real option but to rely on Amazon to connect with customers and make online sales?
No, sir. With great respect, I do have a different opinion on that. I believe there are a lot of options for small sellers. I believe Amazon is a great one, and we've worked very hard. I think we are the best one.
Well,
we
Mr.
have
Bezos,
a lot of different programs that help sellers, but we are not the only option.
There are 2.2 million active sellers as of yesterday. About 37% of those sellers rely on Amazon as their sole source of income. That is over 800,000 people relying on Amazon to feed their families, put their kids through school, and keep a roof over their heads. Mr. Bezos, you have referred to third-party sellers as both your partners and customers. But isn't it true that Amazon refers to third-party sellers as internal competitors?
I think I wouldn't surprise me. In some ways, we are competing, and they're also competing with each other.
Well, that's right. Your
the
own
marketplace
documents,
does allow that.
Mr. Bezos, Amazon's own documents that you produce refer to the very same sellers that you've described as Amazon partners as internal competitors. In fact, we've heard from third-party sellers again and again during the course of the investigation that Amazon is the only game in town. One small business owner we interviewed described it this way, and I quote, "We're stuck. We don't have a choice but to sell through Amazon." Another said, and I quote, "They've never been a great partner, but you have to work with them." During this investigation, we have heard so many heartbreaking stories of small businesses who sunk significant time and resources into building a business and selling on Amazon, only to have Amazon poach their best-selling items and drive them out of business. So I want to talk to you about one company that really stood out from the rest. I want you to pay close attention to how they described your partnership, Mr. Bezos. We heard from a small apparel company that makes and sells what they call useful apparel for people who work on their feet and with their hands, like construction workers and firefighters. This particular business discovered and started selling a unique item that had never been a top seller for the brand. They were making about $60,000 a year on just this one item. One day they woke up and found that Amazon had started listing the exact same product, causing their sales to go to zero overnight. Amazon had undercut their price, setting it below what the manufacturer would generally allow it to be sold, so that even if they wanted to, they couldn't match the price. Here's how the apparel company described working with Amazon, and I quote, "Amazon strings you along for a while because it feels so good to get that paycheck every week. And in the past, for lack of a better term, we called it Amazon heroin. because you just kept going and you had to get your next fix, your next check. But at the end of the day, you find out that this person who was seemingly benefiting you, making you feel good, was just ultimately going to be your downfall, end quote. So Mr. Bezos, this is one of your partners. Why on earth would they compare your company to a drug dealer?
Sir, I have great respect for you in this committee, but I completely disagree with that characterization. What we have done is create in the store a place, if you go back in time, we sold only our own inventory. It was a very controversial decision inside the company to invite third-party sellers to come into what is really our most valuable retail real estate, our product detail pages. We did that because we were convinced that it would be better for the consumer. It would be better for the customer
Bezos,
to have all of that selection. And I think we were right, and I think it's worked out well.
Reclaiming my time. Unfortunately, this is one of,
reclaiming
my time, Mr. Bezos. This is one of many small companies that have told us during this year-long investigation that they were mistreated, abused, and tossed aside by Amazon. Now, Mr. Bezos, you say that Amazon is only focused on doing what's best for the customer. You just said it again, and that third-party sellers. But how is that possible when you compete directly with third-party sellers with your own products that undercut the competition? Isn't it an inherent conflict of interest for Amazon to produce and sell products on its platform that compete directly with third-party sellers, particularly when you, Amazon, sets the rules of the game?
Thank you. No, I don't believe it is. We have the consumer is the one ultimately making the decisions. They're making the decisions about what to buy, what price to buy it at, who to buy it from. And
That's not the question, Mr. Bezos. The question is there an inherent conflict of interest because you are a data company? You know when customers put something in their cart, when they take it out. Traditional brick and mortar stores like a grocery store where competition occurs don't have that. And so I just want to follow up finally on an answer to the question that you gave to Congressman Jayapal. You said that you can't guarantee that the policy of not sharing third-party sellers' data with Amazon's own line hasn't been violated. You couldn't be certain. Can you please explain that to me? Can you list examples of where that policy has been violated? Because it's particularly concerning to me, Mr. Bezos, that shouldn't third parties know for sure that data isn't being shared with your own line, their competitors? Why should a third party seller list their product on Amazon if they're just going to be undercut by Amazon own product as a result of data you take from them?
Sir, I think what I want you to understand, and I think is important to understand, is that we have a policy against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jayapal that policy isn't violated routinely.
Well, we are investigating that, and I do not want to sit here, and I do not want to go beyond what I know right now. But we are, as a result of that Wall Street Journal article, we are looking at that very carefully, and we want to get this back. And I will surely share them with you.
Thank you, and we look forward to that. The evidence we've collected shows that Amazon is only interested in exploiting its monopoly power over the e-commerce marketplace to further expand and protect this power. This investigation makes clear that Amazon's dual role as a platform operator and competing seller on that platform is fundamentally anti-competitive, and Congress must take action. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the history proves that Congress does a poor job in picking winners and losers. And I've looked over a lot of the material that has been assembled. I've been working with the chairman for over a year on this bipartisan investigation, and I have reached the conclusion that we do not need to change our antitrust laws. They have been working just fine. The question here is the question of enforcement of those antitrust laws. Now, we've heard a lot about the Facebook acquisition of Instagram. That happened in 2012. Obama's FTC signed off on that. So regardless of what you think has happened at that time, the fact is that this acquisition did pass the smell test of the regulators involved. Now, maybe they made a mistake or maybe something else happened, I don't know. But the fact is that there is not a problem with the law. Now, back about 35 years ago, AT&T was broken up because it was determined that one-stop shops were monopolistic. And AT&T, because you had to get your long-distance service from your local phone company, that was monopolistic. So the baby bells were spun off. A whole lot has happened since then. There were mergers and acquisitions in the telecom industry. Technology advanced a huge amount. And guess what? We're back to exactly where we were in 1984. So this goes to show that congressional pressure is not the best. Now, using the AT&T example, which I think was a big flop and counterproductive, let me ask Mr. Bezos, say the AT&T example was applied to Amazon, and you were required to spin stuff off. So you might have no more of a one-stop shop, but you have to go to separate places for books or groceries or videos or electronics. How are the consumers helped by that?
Sir, thank you. They would not be.
Right.
Very clear.
Now, Mr. Pichai, let me ask about Google. If you were forced to split up your business lines, say spin off ad tech and YouTube, can you describe what happens to consumers there?
Congressman, today, consumers in most of the areas we are dealing with, they see prices free or falling, and they get more choice than ever before. So I think it serves them well.
And you're right there. So, I'm not going to be on this committee in the next Congress. I am going to put my feet up and become a senior, quote unquote, statesman. But, let me say that we have heard a whole lot of complaints about big tech. Some of them are political in nature, and I share the complaints and the concern of Mr. Jordan and others. And others talk about allegedly anti-competitive activity. It seems to me that it's not for Congress that legislates to toss all of our antitrust laws and the precedent that has been established through litigation over the last 100+ years. But it's something where we ought to go back to the regulators, to the enforcers, have them look at this stuff, and have them make a determination on whether or not the law's been violated. I think the law's good on that, and we don't need to throw it all in the wastebasket. But there are some matters of concern that we have heard from both sides of the aisle that I think need to be addressed. And if it requires an agency like the FTC to say that they've made mistakes in the past, so be it. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and even government agencies do that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, in March of 2012, you suggested by email to your management team that moving faster and copying other apps could, quote, prevent our competitors from getting footholds. Sheryl Sandberg responded that, quote, it is better to do more and move faster, especially if that means you don't have competitors build products that take some of our users. Facebook's product management director added that, quote, I would love to be far more aggressive and nimble in copying competitors. Has Facebook ever taken steps to prevent competitors from getting footholds by copying competitors?
Congresswoman, I view it as our job to understand what people are finding valuable in all of the services that they use. And certainly if someone...
Do you copy your competitors?
Congresswoman, we've certainly adapted features that others have let in, as have others copied and adapted features that...
I'm not concerned about others. I'm just asking you, Mr. Zuckerberg, since March of 2012, after that email conversation, how many competitors did Facebook end up copying?
Congresswoman, I can't give you a number of companies.
Is it less than 5?
Congresswoman, I don't know.
Less than 50? Any estimates? Your team was making a plan. How did it play out?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure I agree with the premise here. Our job is to make sure that we build the best services for people to connect with all the people they care about. And a lot of that is done by innovating and by building new things that are leading the way internally.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Let me go on. Has Facebook ever threatened to clone the products of another company while also attempting to acquire that company?
Congresswoman, not that I recall.
And I'd like to just remind you that you are under oath, and there are quotes from Facebook's own documents. Prior to acquiring Instagram, Facebook began developing a similar product called Facebook Camera, correct?
Congresswoman, that's correct. I've said multiple times that we were competing in the space of building mobile cameras with Instagram. That's what they did at the time. Their competitive set was companies like what we were building with Facebook Camera and ViscoCam and PicPlease.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you ever use this very similar Facebook Camera product to threaten Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you would mean by threaten. I think it was public that we were building a camera app at the time. That was a well-documented thing.
Let me tell you that, in a chat, you told Mr. Systrom that Facebook was, quote, developing our own photo strategy, so how we engage now will also determine how much we're partners versus competitors down the line. Instagram's founder seemed to think that was a threat. He confided in an investor at the time that he feared that you would go into, quote, destroy mode if he didn't sell Instagram to you. So let's just recap. Facebook cloned a popular product, approached the company you identified as a competitive threat, and told them that if they didn't let you buy them up, there would be consequences. Were there any other companies that you used the same tactic with while attempting to buy them?
Congresswoman, I want to respectfully disagree with the characterization. I think it was clear that this was a space that we were going to compete in one way or another. I don't view those conversations as a threat in any way.
I'm just using the documents and the testimony that the committee has collected from others. Did you warn Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat, that Facebook was in the process of cloning the features of his company while also attempting to buy Snapchat?
Congresswoman, I don't remember those specific conversations, but that was also an area where it was very clear that we were going to be building something. People want to be able to communicate privately. They want to be able to communicate with all their friends at once. And we're going to make sure that we build the best products in all of the spaces that we can around helping people stay connected with the people they care about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think the question again here is, when the dominant platform threatens its potential rivals, that should not be a normal business practice. Facebook is a case study, in my opinion, in monopoly power because your company harvests and monetizes our data, and then your company uses that data to spy on competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten smaller competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's very model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy, it harms mom and pop businesses, and it harms consumers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, thank you for being here today. I'm concerned that you've used Amazon's dominant market position to unfairly harm competition. We've heard from a number of companies that Amazon uses proprietary data from third-party companies to launch its own private label products, meets with startups to discuss investing in the product, and then uses the proprietary data from these meetings to create its own private label products, allows the sale of counterfeit items through its web platform. During this subcommittee's field hearing in Boulder this January, PopSocket's CEO and inventor David Barnett detailed how Amazon allowed counterfeit products to appear on Amazon's marketplace ahead of PopSocket's products. Mr. Barnett told CNBC that PopSockets found at least 1,000 counterfeit products for sale on Amazon's marketplace, which Amazon allegedly failed to remedy until PopSockets agreed to a nearly $2 million marketing deal with Amazon. We've also seen troubling reports in the Wall Street Journal detailing Amazon's use of third-party sellers' proprietary data to develop and market its own competitive private label products. The Wall Street Journal also reported last week that Amazon's venture capital fund used meetings with unsuspecting startup companies to gain access to secret proprietary product information and financial details. Amazon then reportedly used that information to launch competing products, often disastrous results for the original startup company. There are many examples of this behavior, but one allegation in the journal's reporting sticks out in particular. In 2011, Amazon contacted Vocalife, LLC's inventor, about the possibility of investing in a speech detection technology. Vocalife's founder accepted the meeting, thinking this was the company's big break. After displaying Vocalife's microphone technology and providing proprietary information, including engineering data, to Amazon employees, the relationship came to an abrupt halt. Amazon employees allegedly stopped responding to emails before the technology eventually found its way into the Amazon's Echo device. These allegations are serious, especially because the size and scope of these practices couldn't happen without Amazon's monopolistic control of the marketplace. I'm also concerned that given Amazon's allowance of counterfeit goods on its marketplace, especially counterfeit goods from China, that Amazon's marketplace may be knowingly or unknowingly furthering China's use of forced and slave labor conditions. This is especially important following recent reports that at least 80 global companies that sell on the Amazon marketplace, including Nike, Starbucks, and Samsung, have ties to Chinese factories that use enslaved Uyghur Muslims. Following these concerning reports, Senator Hawley introduced an important bill last week requiring American businesses to certify that their supply chain does not rely on forced labor. I will be introducing the House companion bill later this afternoon. While I do not expect you to have intimate knowledge of the legislation, I do want to ask all four of our witnesses a simple yes or no question. Will you certify here today that your company does not use and will never use slave labor to manufacture your products or allow products to be sold on your platform that are manufactured using slave labor? Mr. Cook, you were kind enough to visit with me on the phone. I think we briefly discussed this issue. If you can give a yes or no answer, and I understand you haven't read the details of the bill, but would you agree to this idea?
I would love to engage on the legislation with you, Congressman, but let me be clear, forced labor is abhorrent. And we would not tolerate it in Apple. And so I would love to get with your office and engage on the legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Pichai.
Congressman, I'll share your concern in this area. I find it abhorrent as well. Happy to engage with your office and discuss this further.
So I really don't want to even engage with my office half the time. Will you guys agree that slave labor is not something that you will tolerate in manufacturing your products or in products that are sold on your platforms?
I agree, Congressman.
And Mr. Cook?
We wouldn't tolerate it. We would terminate a supplier relationship if it were found.
Mr. Zuckerberg?
I agree. We wouldn't tolerate this, and if we found anything like this, we would also terminate any relationship.
And Mr. Bezos?
Yes, I agree completely.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Buck for that excellent line of questioning and for the upcoming legislation. I look forward to joining that. We want, in the 19th century, we had the robber barons. In the 21st century, we got the cyber barons. And we want to make sure that the extraordinary power and wealth that you've been able to amass is not used against the interests of democracy and human rights around the world, and not against the interests of a free market at home. So, Mr. Bezos, let me turn to you. I'm interested in the role that you play as a gatekeeper. A lot of consumers want to know when the HBO Max app will be available on your Fire device, and I understand that negotiations are ongoing, but that your company is not only asking for financial terms, but also for content from Warner Media. Is that right, and is that a fair way to proceed? In other words, is it fair to use your gatekeeper status role in the streaming device market to promote your position as a competitor in the video streaming market with respect to content?
I'm not familiar with the details of those negotiations. As you said, they're underway right now. I predict that the companies will eventually come to an agreement. And I think this is kind of two large companies negotiating agreement. It's kind of normal case of normal commerce.
But here's why I pursue it precisely, because it is a large company, and in a way, they stand in for hundreds of thousands of much smaller companies who are even in a more disadvantageous position with respect to negotiating with you. I guess the general proposition then you can speak to if you don't know the details of this, which is it okay to negotiate not just for financial terms in having someone be part of your fire unit, but also to try to extract in that negotiation leverage with respect to getting content from them?
Well, again, I'm not familiar with the details. What I would
I'm not asking about that one in general.
In general, I think that when two companies are negotiating, you are negotiating not just the amount of money that's going to change hands, but also what you're going to get in exchange for the amount of money. That is a very fundamental way that business works.
Do you see at least to outsiders that would look like a structural conflict of interest, like you're using your control over access to people's living rooms, essentially. You're using that in order to obtain leverage in terms of getting creative content that you want. And are you essentially converting power in one domain into power in another domain where it doesn't belong?
I think what I should do is offer to get you information. I'll get it to your office for you, because I'm not familiar enough with this, and I could imagine that there would be scenarios, if we're just talking in the abstract, where it would be inappropriate, and I could imagine scenarios where it would be very normal business and very appropriate.
Fair enough. I want to talk about an emerging market, smart homes, and I want to start with the hub of the smart home, smart speakers. Does Amazon price the Echo device below cost?
Not its list price, but it's often on promotion, and sometimes when it's on promotion, it may be below cost, yes.
Well, several other companies did tell us, in fact, that Amazon is pricing Echo devices way below cost, making it nearly impossible for them to compete, and aggressively discounting Alexa-enabled speakers as a strategy to own the smart home. Like many markets we've heard about today, smart speakers with voice assistants like Alexa, along with the myriad of smart home appliances that Alexa can interact with, make up the next ecosystem or platform for tech companies to lock in customers. Would you say the smart home market for which the Echo Ring security system and other smart devices operate is a winners take all market? Yes or no?
No, I wouldn't, especially if we're able to succeed at what we want, which is we would like our vision for this is that smart home speakers should answer to different wake words.
Well,
So
when considering the acquisition of
on a case by case basis, and I think in that just to Phoenix, I think it's important if we could achieve that. Then I think you would get really good behavior on the part of competitive voice agents helping you.
When you were looking at acquiring Ring, you wrote to your executive team, quote, "We're buying market position, not technology, and that market position and momentum is very valuable." So if smart homes are not a market with lock-in effects, why would a leading market position and momentum be so very valuable?
Sir, market position is valuable in almost any business, and it's one of the primary things that one would look at in an acquisition. There are multiple reasons that we might buy a company. Sometimes we're trying to buy some technology or some IP. Sometimes it's a talent acquisition. But the most common case is market position, that the company has traction with customers, they've built a service, maybe they were the first mover. There could be any number of reasons why they have that market position. But that's a very common reason to acquire a company.
Well, once a company becomes dominant in a market, it can favor its own products and services. Alexa-enabled smart speakers make up over 60% of the smart speaker market. Mr. Bezos, when I ask Alexa to play my favorite song, Prime Music is the default music player. Is that right?
I think that's true if you're a Prime member, yes.
And a New York Times report found that when users say, Alexa, buy batteries, Alexa responds, would you like to buy AA Amazon basic batteries? So has Alexa ever been trained to favor Amazon products when users shop by voice?
The time of the gentleman has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
I don't know if it's been trained in that way. I'm sure there are cases where we do promote our own products, which is of course a common practice in business, and so it wouldn't surprise me if Alexa sometimes does promote our own products.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Pichai, during our prior discussion earlier today, you said that Google doesn't work with the Chinese military. That answer was deceptive because Google works with many of the entities that work with the Chinese military in common collaboration. And just as one example would be Tsinghua University, where Jeff Dean, who is the head of Google AI, served on the Computer Science Advisory Committee for the university, and then the university takes nearly $15 million from China's Central Military Commission. So you can see how even if you don't literally show up at the offices of the Chinese military, if you're all showing up at the same place, working together on AI, that would lead to my concern. But I want to talk about search because that's an area where I know Google has real market dominance. On December 11th, you testified to the Judiciary Committee, and in response to a question from my colleague Zoe Lofgren about search, you said, we don't manually intervene on any particular search result. But leaked memos obtained by the Daily Caller show that that isn't true. In fact, those memos were altered December 3rd, just a week before your testimony, and they describe a deceptive news blacklist and a process for developing that blacklist approved by Ben Gomes, who leads search with your company, and also something called a fringe ranking, which seems to beg the question, who gets to decide what's fringe? And in your answer, you said to Ms. Lofgren that there is no manual intervention of search. That was your testimony, and now I'm going to cite specifically from this memo from the Daily Caller. It says, that the Daily Caller obtained from your company. It says, the beginning of the workflow starts when a website is placed on a watch list. It continues, this watch list is maintained and stored by Eris with access restricted to policy and enforcement specialists. Sort of does beg the question who these enforcement specialists are. Access to the listing can also be shared on a need-to-know basis to enforce or enrich the policy violations. The investigation of the watch list is done in the tool Athena, the Ares manual review tool. So you said to Congresswoman Lofgren that there was no manual review tool, and then your documents indicate that there is a manual review tool. So help us understand the inconsistency.
Congressman, there are two parts to this. In general, we algorithmically approach our search results. We have robust policies to do so, and we test it both with user feedback and we use raters to validate. Last year alone, we ran over 300,000 experiments and launched around 3,000 improvements to search. And we don't manually tune. The question last time was in the context of, is there someone behind the curtain, manually tuning an individual search result? We don't. We generally approach it algorithmically. We, however, in order to comply with the law in every country we operate in, for example, there may be an actor or a website identified as interfering in elections, and we then have to put that site on a list so that that doesn't appear in our search results against queries. So other examples would be violent extremism.
And is that done manually, Mr. Pichai? That process you described, is that done manually?
And we could get reports from law enforcement agencies. We are complying with, or it's a known DMCA-based.
There is either a manual component or there is not a manual component. Which is it?
For creating those lists, that process can involve manual portions.
Okay, great. Well, that is sort of the concern that I have. You've now said something different today than you said to Ms. Lofgren, because you've confessed that there is a manual component to the way in which you blacklist content. And it seems to be no coincidence that it's sites like Gateway Pundit, The Western Journal, American Spectator, Daily Caller, and Breitbart that receive the ire or the negative treatment as a consequence of your manual tooling. And it also seems noteworthy that whistleblowers at your own company have spoken out. You said that one of the reasons you maintain this manual tool is to stop election interference. I believe it is in fact your company that is engaging in election interference. And it's not just my view. Mike Wacker came out and was a whistleblower indicating that the manual blacklist targets that Google specifically goes after are those who support President Trump, who hold a conservative viewpoint, and he left your company in 2019 because he was speaking out against these outraged mobs. So can you see how when you empower individuals, some of the same individuals that Project Veritas has exposed as labeling people as terrorists who say make America great again or who support the president, that in fact can be the very election interference that we're concerned about, and that you're using your market dominance in search to accomplish that election interference?
Congressman, with respect, I strongly disagree with that characterization. We don't approach this work with any political viewpoint. We do that to comply with law, known copyright violations, very in narrow circumstances, and we have to do that to comply with the law. And in many cases, those requests can come from law enforcement agencies.
Your own employees are saying you're doing it for a different reason. Your own employees are saying it's political bias. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.
And I'm sorry, may I be recognized for unanimous consent request?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just given the productivity of our discussion, I'd request that we be permitted a third round of questioning.
Without objection. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Yeah. You know, the documents prove that the news and journalism industry in this country are an economic freefall. Over 200 counties in America no longer have a local newspaper, and tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in recent years. The reason journalism is in freefall is that Google and Facebook now capture the vast majority of digital ad revenue. Although news publishers produce valuable content, it is Google and Facebook that increasingly profit off their content. Publishers have told us that Google and Facebook maintain their dominance in these markets in part through anti-competitive conduct, as well as conflict of interest. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2015, Facebook reported high and quickly growing rates of video viewership on its platform. Based on these metrics, news publishers fired hundreds of journalists, choosing instead to boost their video divisions. In 2018, it was discovered that Facebook had inflated these metrics and had known about the inaccuracies several years before Facebook publicly disclosed this. Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that these metrics were inflated before they were publicly released?
Congressman, no, I did not, and we regret that mistake and have put in place a number of other measures since then to make sure that we...
And do you realize the harm that this caused journalists across the country?
Congressman, I certainly know how important it is that the metrics that we report are accurate, and we've put in place additional measures to make sure that we can audit those.
And what do you have to say to the journalists who lost their jobs because of Facebook's deception?
Well, Congressman, I disagree with that characterization and also your description of what...
Reclaiming my time, Google, meanwhile, maintains its dominance in part through aggregating data from across its products and services. Mr. Pichai, I understand that Google collects user data on users' browsing activity through its Chrome browser. Does Google use that data for its own purposes, either in advertising or to develop and refine its algorithms?
Mr. Chairman, we do use data to improve our products and services for our users. Anytime we do it, we believe in giving users choice, control, and transparency. We make it very clear, and we give them simplified settings to choose how they like their data to use.
And so you do use the data that you get from these companies for your purposes.
My understanding was whether we use data in general to improve our products and services, and we do use data to show ads, but we give users the choice. They can turn ads personalization on or off.
Now, this obviously, the use of this data from all these companies gives you a tremendous advantage over them and over any competitor. Does the ability to make money in any way affect Google's algorithm in terms of what news appears in a typical user's search results?
The way we rank our search results, we don't take into account commercial relationship that we have.
Okay. But Facebook and Google have gravely threatened journalism in the United States. Reporters have been fired, local newspapers have been shut down, and now we hear that Google and Facebook are making money over what news they let the American people see. This is a very dangerous situation. And unfortunately, my time has expired and I have to yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to pick up where I left off. Mr. Pichai, there are rioting groups that are going unchecked with the posting of what I would contend is very violent video. Yet yesterday I was sent a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the not dangers of children returning to school. And when I clicked on the link, it was taken down. And then I was sent a different link on YouTube and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure. And it says that this video has been removed for violating YouTube's community guidelines. How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors who think it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on YouTube?
Congressman, we believe in freedom of expression, and there is a lot of debate on YouTube about effective ways to deal with COVID. We allow robust debate. But in the area during a pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So for example, in the US, it would be CDC for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world. And so for example, if there is aspects of a video, and if it explicitly states something could be a proven cure, and that doesn't meet CDC guidelines, it's
free expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate to silence physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. I'm going to switch quickly to Mr. Zuckerberg. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that technology platforms have been stifling conservative news and opinions. You employ a panel of content moderators. Can you explain how Facebook chooses who these moderators are?
Thanks, Congressman. We do hire a lot of people around the world to work on safety and security. Our team is more than 30 or 35,000 people working on that now. We certainly try to do this in a way that is neutral to all viewpoints. We want to be a platform for all ideas. I don't think you build a social product with the goal of giving people a voice if you don't believe that people being able to express a wide variety of things is ultimately valuable for the world. And we try to make sure that our policies and our operations ultimately reflect and carry that out.
Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Congressman, I don't think we choose to hire them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and we wouldn't tolerate it if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your content moderators?
Congressman, in terms of the 30 to 35,000 people or more at this point who are doing safety and security review, that is correct. In terms of the people setting the policies, I think it is valuable to have people with a diversity of viewpoints involved so we can make sure that we have the different viewpoints represented in the policy development process. And we also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking into account all perspectives.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with a list of specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. Can you think of one conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Congressman, I'm talking about different external stakeholders and groups that are inputs to our policy development process. And I'm not involved in those conversations directly, so I would have to get back to you with specifics on that. But I'm quite confident that we speak with people across the ideological spectrum when we're developing our policies.
I would very much appreciate a follow-up on that. Real quickly, can you briefly explain the approval process for third-party fact checkers, and how many fact checkers does Facebook employ?
Yes, thanks. We work with about 70 fact-checking partners around the world, and the goal of the program is to limit the distribution of viral hoaxes, so things that are clearly false, from getting a lot of distribution. But we don't ourselves want to be in the business of determining what is true and what is false. That feels like an inappropriate role for us to play. We rely on an organization called the Pointer Institute, and I think it's called the Independent Fact-Checking Organization, that has a set of guidelines of what makes an independent fact-checker, and they certify those fact-checkers, and then any organization that gets certification from that group is qualified to be a fact-checking partner within Facebook.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. We're going to I'm going to recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes, and then we're going to take a short break of the committee. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, Amazon has a significant problem with counterfeit products being sold on its platform. Counterfeit products not only rip off the owners of legitimate businesses, they also can be dangerous. Counterfeit medicine, baby food, automobile tires, and other products can kill. Amazon has said it's fixing its counterfeit problem, but counterfeiting seems to be getting worse, not better. Amazon is a $1 trillion company, but Amazon customers are not guaranteed that the products purchased on your platform are authentic. Amazon acts like it's not responsible for counterfeits being sold by third-party sellers on its platform, and we've heard that Amazon puts the burden and cost on brand owners to police Amazon's site, even though Amazon makes money when a counterfeit good is sold on its site. More than half of Amazon's sales come from third-party seller accounts. Why isn't Amazon more aggressive in ensuring that counterfeit goods are not sold on its platform? And why isn't Amazon responsible for keeping all counterfeit products off of its platform?
Thank you. This is an incredibly important issue and one that we work very hard on. Counterfeits are a scourge. They are a problem that is not, it does not help us earn trust with customers. It's bad for customers. It's bad for honest third-party sellers. We do a lot to prevent counterfeiting. We have a team of more than 1,000 people that does this. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars in systems that do this. We have something called Project Zero, which helps brands serialize individual products, which really helps with counterfeiting.
Well,
we have
I'm glad that
other
you have
programs
those
as well.
I'm glad that you have those features in place, but why isn't Amazon responsible for keeping all counterfeit products off of its platform?
We certainly work to do so, Congressman, and we do so not just for our own retail products, but for third-party products as well.
Well,
and we
okay.
do work closely
Thank
with
you.
brands.
We've heard from numerous third-party sellers and brand owners that Amazon has used knockoffs as leverage to pressure sellers to do what Amazon wants. For example, the founder of PopSockets testified in January that Amazon itself was selling knockoffs of its product. After reporting the problem, it was only after his company committed to spending $2 million on advertisements that Amazon appears to have stopped diverting sales to these knockoffs. What is your explanation for that business practice?
That's unacceptable. If those are the facts, and that if someone somewhere inside Amazon said, buy X dollars in ads and then we'll help you with your counterfeit problem, that is unacceptable. And I will look into that and we'll get back to your office with that. What I can tell you is that we have a counterfeit crimes unit. We attempt to prosecute counterfeiters. I would encourage this body to pass stricter penalties for counterfeiters and to increase law enforcement resources to go after counterfeiters.
But your company does make money off of counterfeit goods being sold on your platform, isn't that correct?
If it does, in my view, sir, it would only be in the short term. We don't make. I would much rather lose a sale than lose a customer.
All right,
we make
enough.
money because customers come back.
Fair enough, sir. Making companies pay extra to avoid having their products disappear in rankings seems to be so unfair, especially to small businesses. The American dream is threatened when that happens. Don't you think so?
Sir, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. If you're talking about what we were just talking about a second ago, I agree completely.
I'm talking about a totally different situation now, where a company that is selling on your platform but is not paying anything extra gets buried in the rankings, and but companies that pay extra are able to get their products pushed up and they avoid getting pushed down. Is that an acceptable practice?
Sir, I think what you're referring to is the fact that we offer an advertising service basically for third-party sellers to drive additional promotion to their products. That's a voluntary program. Some sellers use it, some don't. And it's been very effective at helping people promote their products.
With that, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The committee will stand in a brief recess.